Before starting this video, I do want to give a thank you to my patrons that support the channel. And if you would like to support the channel, there are some great benefits for you in the link down below. So with that, let's get into today's video. But they were all deceived, for another deck was made. Deep in the lands of Commander, in the fires of competitive magic, I forged a master deck, and within this deck, I poured my cruelty, my malice, and my will to dominate all CDH. One deck to rule them all. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on Pub Stomp MTG. So with this video, I'm going to go over Sauron the Dark Lord in CDH. So this is a deck that I've been brewing for quite a while, and I played tested it for quite a while too, and so I decided to share with you some of my results and some of the things that I've learned while playing with Sauron the Dark Lord, because honestly it's a pretty incredible commander, mainly because it has such great stats and also the abilities on it are pretty great. I would say the only downside is that it is 6 mana. However, there's a lot of other commanders on the rise, for example Cedh being a 6 mana commander. So honestly, I feel like Sauron the Dark Lord does have some legs. It does have some great abilities. So it is in Grixis colors. For 6 mana, it's a legendary creature, avatar, horror. It does have that great ward ability, sacrificing a legendary artifact or legendary creature. Also, whenever an opponent casts a spell, amass Orcs 1. That's probably one of the best abilities on here. Whenever an army you control deals combat damage to a player, the ring tempts you. And whenever the ring tempts you, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 4 cards. I will say something about Sauron that is pretty unique about him is the fact that there's a lot of things going on with him left and right. Amassing triggers, also the ring tempting you. Also on top of that, having a great ward ability, essentially making people sacrifice a legendary creature or legendary artifact. Not too many legendary artifacts though, but more legendary creatures on the battlefield. So essentially he can't be targeted by spells in most cases unless somebody has their commander out. But I would say the best abilities is the fact that you could amass and then swing in with that amassed army, and then you can discard your hand and then draw 4 cards. You can constantly kind of churn through your deck left and right as long as you get more temptations on you. You can essentially just put a lot of cards in your graveyard and just eventually get a Yawgmoth's Will or even a Underworld Breach. So again, there's a lot of different things going on with Sauron the Dark Lord. A lot of triggers to keep track of. For example, when people are playing spells left and right, it's almost like a Rhystic Study, but for amassing orcs. So it is pretty unique in that aspect, but what I do like about it is the fact that, again, it is a unique commander. It's doing something that not many Grixis cards are doing in general. I mean, aside from drawing cards and then discarding cards, but overall, it's a very unique commander that I feel like should probably see more CDH play, in my opinion. Again, the only thing that's really restricting this Sauron is the fact that he is 6 mana to cast. However, in most cases, I've honestly casted him maybe turn 2, turn 3, depending on the situation. However, this is a mid-range deck. It's not a turbo deck by any means. So with the rest of this video, I'm going to go over the game plan of this deck. What is Sauron trying to accomplish in a game of CDH? Later on, I'm going to talk about some of the combos to run in the deck so that you could win the game. And then later on, I'm going to talk about opening hands, because I feel like opening hands is probably one of the most important things you could do in the game, if not the most important, because if you do have a handful of good stuff but you don't have any lands, you're not going to get too far unless you have really fast mana rocks. But in most cases, you want to make sure you get the right type of hand to sculpt the win. Alright, so now let's get started. Let's first talk about the game plan of the deck. So with Sauron, it's all about temptation. We want to make sure we get tempted by the ring as much as we can so that we can discard our hand and draw 4 cards. I would say what's very nice about Sauron is the fact that when you amass Orcs 1 and whenever an army you control deals combat damage to a player, the ring tempts you. So it's very easy. It's built in with Sauron himself. However, I decided to add a little bit more temptation mechanics in the deck, because the more we could tempt Sauron, the more that we could discard our hand and draw 4 new cards. So the first card I did want to bring your attention to that deals with the ring temptation mechanic is Bilbo Retired Burglar. So for 3 mana, when he enters or leaves the battlefield, the ring tempts you. Whenever Bilbo deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token. So if Sauron is on the board and you play Bilbo Retired Burglar, and when it enters the battlefield, you could essentially discard your hand and draw 4 new cards. Plus there is a lot of sack outlets in the deck so that you could sacrifice Bilbo if you wanted to, so that you could have that ring tempt you again to trigger Sauron. Plus, if Bilbo is your ring bearer, you'll essentially have Skulk, and then when you deal combat damage to a player, you will get a treasure token, so that's pretty great value by itself with Bilbo. I did also want to slightly touch on Soothing of Smeagol for 2 mana, return target non-token creature to its owner's hand, the ring tempts you. So the ring tempts you, but say for example somebody has a Stax piece on the board, you could put it to their hand, and then on top of that, you could have the ring tempt you. And if Sauron's on the battlefield, you could draw 4 new cards as well. But another impactful card I would like to mention is Call of the Ring. So for 2 mana, at the beginning of your upkeep, the ring tempts you. Whenever you choose a creature as your ring bearer, you may pay 2 life. If you do, you draw a card. So yes, if you choose Ragavan as your ring bearer, no longer is he just a chump blocker on the board or a turn 1 enabler for treasure. Because he is the ring bearer, he will have Skulk, and as long as your opponents don't have any creatures 2 power or less to block it, you're good and golden to swing away with Ragavan. Not only that, the Call of the Ring is pretty incredible value, especially with Sauron the Dark Lord. At the beginning of your upkeep, the ring tempts you. So yeah, let me get this straight. When the ring tempts you with Call of the Ring at the beginning of your upkeep, Sauron is going to trigger, drawing you 4 cards at the beginning of each of your upkeeps. That's pretty insane value. And if you choose to pay 2 life, you could draw 5 cards essentially. So let me tell you, while I was playing games, I was just churning through my deck left and right because of these 2 cards alone, and the synergy is absolutely incredible. Also, I did want to talk about 2 other cards that I found worked really well with each other, and that's Gollum Patient Plotter and Phyrexian Altar. Again, I was really debating on having Gollum in this list or not because honestly, it's not the best thing in the world, but it has a great temptation mechanic built into it, and also you could sacrifice from the graveyard. So there's many scenarios where I had all 3 of these on the battlefield with Sauron the Dark Lord, Gollum, and Phyrexian Altar on the battlefield. Typically, I would also have some other creatures on the battlefield to sacrifice. So the crazy synergy is the fact that if you sacrifice Phyrexian Altar to Gollum Patient Plotter, the ring will tempt you to draw 4 new cards with Sauron, and then you could sacrifice a creature on the battlefield with that mana with Phyrexian Altar. So normally I would put Gollum back to my hand, I would recast him, sacrifice him to Phyrexian Altar to have the ring tempt me again, so then I'd rinse and repeat until I had no creatures left besides Sauron on the battlefield. And I churned through so many cards, the cards that I wanted, and some of the cards I wanted to play, so overall, this is a pretty great synergy. Outside of this little synergy, Phyrexian Altar is pretty good with Sauron. Say for example, people are casting spells on your turn left and right, you can amass orcs and then sacrifice that one before the next trigger happens so that you can have a lot of mana to dump into another spell. Another synergistic part of the deck is using Orcish Bowmasters in there, mainly because it has that ability of when it enters the battlefield and whenever an opponent draws a card, except for the first one they draw, in each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmasters deals 1 damage to any target, then amass orcs 1. So this by itself is pretty good. Overall, a lot of people have been focusing on a wheel package with Orcish Bowmasters, which yeah, there is a wheel package in here, but it's not the main focus of the deck. But with Orcish Bowmasters having that synergy with Wheel of Fortune, for example, we could essentially deal 22 damage spread around to any target. Also on top of that, we could have a 22/22 orc on the battlefield. And if we already do have an orc army on the battlefield, we could just swing with that orc army and then swing in for an immense amount of damage. But one of the most synergistic cards, in my opinion, with Sauron the Dark Lord is Razaketh the Foul-Blooded. If you have both of these creatures on the battlefield, it's essentially a tutoristic study in a sense where someone casts the Thassa's Oracle for the win. You can have Sauron make a 1/1 orc army based off of that cast trigger, and then you can immediately sacrifice that to Razaketh. Then when that person casts Tainted Pact or Demonic Consultation, you'll have another trigger with Sauron the Dark Lord, and then you can immediately sacrifice that orc army to Razaketh. So you essentially get 2 free tutors to stop a win condition. Or if your opponents are casting spells left and right, you could essentially sacrifice each of those orc armies you amass, and then you could essentially assemble a win condition later on in the game when it's your turn. Of course, I did also have to add in some draw effects like the One Ring, Mystic Remora, and Rhystic Study. I did want to add the One Ring more for flavor reasons, but it's honestly proven more and more that it's a really formidable draw effect. I will say the One Ring is an incredible draw effect. Each time you tap it, you're just going to be drawing so much cards off of it based off of the bird encounters on it. Also, to put this in perspective, the One Ring, say for example you played on turn 1, I've played it on turn 1 many times, and then some games would last like 5 or 6 turns. And so when you think about it this way, so if you do play the ring on turn 1 and you tap it to draw a card, each time you tap it, you're going to be drawing more and more cards. And say, for example, let's go to that turn 6 scenario. You would eventually draw 21 cards based off of the One Ring's ability. So obviously these are great card draw effects. However, the best card draw effect in the game, at least for Cdh, is Ad Nauseam. I would say I almost took this out of the deck mainly because of the amount of chunky creatures in the deck like Razaketh or even Hoarding Broodlord, but the power you get out of it simply can't be denied of how much card draw you will get to find a win. Speaking of wins, let's now discuss some of the win cons in the deck. So the first combo is pretty much the fastest and the most efficient combo in the deck. It's the Thassa's Oracle, Demonic Consultation, or Tainted Pack combo. Nothing could be really said about this combo, but it's just the most efficient way of winning in Cdh, at least at the moment. So of course we're in the Grixis color scheme, so this fits perfectly in the deck. Another classic Grixis combo in the deck is using Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, and also Brain Freeze. So essentially you're just going to mill yourself out, and then you could cast a Thassa's Oracle at the end using Underworld Breach. However, if you want to be fancy, you could also Brain Freeze everybody else to make them all mill their whole entire deck. So with the most notable combos out of the way, I did want to go over Doomsday with Sauron the Dark Lord. Doomsday hasn't really been seen as much in Cdh anymore. It was pretty popular, I feel like, a while ago, but it's kind of diminished here and there. But I feel like Sauron could revamp it because it has that ability. So you search your library and graveyard for 5 cards and then exile the rest. Put the chosen cards on top of your library in any order. You lose half your life rounded up. This is very synergistic with Sauron the Dark Lord. Say for example you have him on the battlefield with an Orc army without Summoning Sickness. So with that noted, you'll then cast Doomsday so that you put 5 cards on top of your library and then the rest exiled. Then with that Orc army, you will swing away with it, and as long as it connects with an opponent, you'll be tempted by the ring. And obviously with Sauron the Dark Lord, whenever you are tempted by the ring, you can discard your hand and draw 4 cards. Then you could draw into your counter spells or whatever kind of Doomsday pile you put in to win the game with Thassa's Oracle. So overall, this is a pretty decent way of using Doomsday. It's probably not the best thing to do with Doomsday. However, I feel like it's very good overall because of Sauron's ability of drawing 4 cards. It's enough cards to activate Thassa's Oracle for the win. There is also one more combo I do want to discuss with you, and that's the Hoarding Broodlord combo. This is a pretty classic combo that's come out in the recent months. If you do have an Entomb in your hand as well as a Reanimate, you could essentially put Hoarding Broodlord into the graveyard by using Entomb, then reanimate it, putting it onto the battlefield. Then with Hoarding Broodlord's ability, you could go search for Saw in Half, then you could target Hoarding Broodlord for that Saw in Half, so 2 Hoarding Broodlords enter the battlefield at the same time. Then you could search for 2 cards based off of those 2 ETBs. You could search for Burnt Offering and Peer into the Abyss. You could tap Hoarding Broodlord for Burnt Offering because of that Convoke ability to sacrifice that Hoarding Broodlord for 8 floating black mana. Then with that 8 floating black mana, you could then cast Peer into the Abyss, drawing half of your library. So with all those cards in your hand, you should probably figure out a win combo from there. So overall, I pulled off this combo about 5 times, not necessarily having the Entomb and Reanimate in my hand to do the Hoarding Broodlord thing. However, I did have Hoarding Broodlord in the graveyard and then I had a Reanimate in my hand. But honestly, every single time that I pulled this off, I basically won because of the amount of cards I had in my hand to pull off something. So overall, this is a great combo in the deck for sure. So now that I've talked about the game plan in the deck as well as the combos to run in the deck, now let's talk about the direction of playing the deck. Alright, so let's start this off first. So just to preface, I'm not the best at this by any means. This is my first time talking about opening hands. And so if there's something that I missed, let me know down below in the comments. I definitely take constructive criticism to heart because I definitely want to make sure I'm doing things right for you guys and also for myself when playing Magic the Gathering. So with this, let's start and let's actually restart this hand because I've seen it already. So let's get a fresh new set of hands. Alright, so with this first hand, it looks pretty fast overall. So what we could do is Mana Crypt. We could also put a Volcanic Island on the battlefield. Also a Fellwar Stone. And then later on, what we could do, or even what we could do now, is put Unmarked Grave onto the, and search for a Broodlord onto the graveyard. And then after that, I mean, again, there's a lot of fast mana here, so your imagination is as good as mine. Next turn, on turn 2, we could play a Mana Confluence. And yeah, we could Toxic Deluge if there's some stacks pieces on the board. So not a bad hand. You get a tutor, you get a tutor for your graveyard, and you do get some fast mana. So pretty decent hand. Again, and you also get a board wipe. So again, not a bad hand. Alright, so with this next hand, let's see, we get 4 lands on the hand. We also get a tutor, but only for instance in sorceries. We also get a counterspell, and we also get an Underworld Breach. So this is not the best by any means, because, I mean, what we could do is turn 1 Mystical Tutor and possibly get another counterspell to make sure somebody is kind of kept in check, but again, you don't really want to police around in CDH. I mean, in some cases you do want to, especially if you're playing against those like super aggro, not necessarily aggro, but turbo decks. So this one is not the best. It's not really that fast, especially depending on the type of pod you're facing. If you are against a Stacks pod, I would possibly consider it, but if you are playing against a turbo pod, definitely not one to consider. So let's restart this and let's get a new hand. So we do have 3 lands, no fast mana. We do have 2 reanimation spells. Technically Yawgmoth's Will is a 3rd, but not really. And Force of Will, this is a no. So we do have some fast mana. We do have 2 lands that we could play. We could do this for, let's do a Badlands essentially, and then you could do Chrome Mox, and then probably exile the Windfall. So you have 2 mana floating. I mean, not 2 mana floating, but you have 2 mana. And then what you could do is Vampiric Tutor at the end of the step. And then what you could actually do is, this is what I would do because you're low on in your hand. I would actually get a Sauron the Dark Lord, not Sauron the Dark Lord, but I would get a Jeweled Lotus for Sauron the Dark Lord to tutor, so that when it's your turn, you could play your other land. And you could also play that Jeweled Lotus so that you could cast Sauron the Dark Lord. And then what you could do on your next turn, and if you amass a token, you could Diabolic Intent to get a tutor essentially, and yeah, from there, just kind of go nuts. So this is a pretty decent opener. Alright, so with this next hand, we don't really have too much going for us. I mean, we only have 1 land, and if, I'm just going to guess, yeah, no, we don't want that. Alright, so with this next hand, we do have 2 lands, and we also have a Burnt Offering and a Ragavan. So we could do this for, we could get a Badlands again, for an example. We could put Ragavan turn 1 down, or, okay, no. I take that back, go with a fish. Always go with a fish for more card draw, because especially if you're first in turn order, you definitely want to take advantage of that. Even though it's like you get card draw or you get ramp within treasure, because the quicker you get Ragavan out and start swinging, the more value we'll get. Later in the game, Ragavan absolutely sucks unless you get him to be your ring bearer, but yeah. If you get Mystic Remora, say for example, people played about 5 spells before your next turn, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that would have been way better. So yeah, Mystic Remora. Yeah, always go with the fish turn 1. So don't mind me with my Ragavan. Don't do that. Alright, so we don't really have a fast way of going about this. We do have an Arcane Signet, but again, it's kind of too slow in my opinion. I mean, we could gamble for a faster mana piece, but really, that's not the play. Okay, so we do have Brain Freeze ad nauseum. We don't really have too much fast mana besides Arcane Signet, so I don't think this is a good hand to start with. Alright. And this ain't that much better either compared to the last one. We do have 3 lands though, but again, If you are playing the slow game, this could be considerable, especially with Orcish Bowmasters. We do have Ad Nauseam in the hand, so eventually we will get to that. We do also have Force of Will, probably draw into another blue card eventually. I guess we're only just drawing into lands. I guess Chain of Vapor would have been the third card to draw in this, but yeah, this one probably is a pass. Okay, so this one is pretty decent actually, now I think about it, because what you could do is you could play Glittering Caves. I mean, I would hate to do this one because it's part of the combo, but it's in our hand, so I would exile the Hoarding Broodlord, and then turn 0 with a turn 1, and it's kind of hard because I don't know if somebody plays an early turn 1 fish Mystic Remora, you could definitely put Orcish Bowmasters in Surprise and start pinging and put a army on the battlefield, so then when you get Sauron on the battlefield later on, you could actually already have your army amassed without Summoning Sickness and you could swing away. Also, we do have Doomsday, which is pretty decent. It's more of a mid-game finisher in my opinion. So I don't think this is the best hand, but it's pretty decent so far with Ragavan and Orcish Bowmasters. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Sauron the Dark Lord. I do feel like this is a pretty CEDH viable commander in my opinion. I know the mana cost is a little bit intense with 6 mana. However, with fast mana rocks and all the things that we do have available in CEDH, I do feel like he's pretty viable. I mean, again, there's Tivit, there's also Atraxa that's been kind of coming out of the network and kind of coming in full force, and a lot of success has been seen from those decks specifically. And so I'd love to see that for Sauron, especially with the way he works. I love the abilities that he is making tokens so that you could sacrifice them, or you could use them to bash people's faces so that you could get some more card draw. Also, refilling your graveyard and also drawing a new set of cards is pretty good overall with Sauron. Just having that ability to constantly recycle through your deck, putting it into the graveyard so that you could feel for your Underworld Breach is pretty great ability overall. And plus with the reanimation package, I do feel like Sauron is a pretty good viable commander. However, let me know down below in the comments, what are your thoughts and opinions about Sauron the Dark Lord? Do you feel like I'm right, or do you feel like he still needs some legs in order for him to kind of be that CEDH viable commander like I mentioned previously? But again, let me know down below in the comments. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.